Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is May 13th, 2026. Has your fertility been negatively impacted by climate change? What cost is the global working class paying for the US and Israeli war on Iran? How are politicians trying to reintroduce segregation into American communities? What is hantavirus, and are lockdowns imminent? What's going on with abortion pills now? Why has Trump stopped inspecting ICE facilities? How is the US Navy using AI to wage war on Iran? How is the government trying to take away the Second Amendment from our trans neighbors? What are some of the living conditions for Palestinians in the West Bank? What companies are cutting blank checks to the Pentagon to use AI in warfare? Why is the NSA telling you the Russians are hacking your computer? Why is Google's AI scanning your personal photos? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps and links in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, cause it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity. I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
Toxic chemicals and climate change work together to harm fertility across species. May 1st, 2026 via ehn.org. In a recent review published in NPJ Emerging Contaminants, researchers examine how toxic chemicals can reduce fertility in both humans and wildlife, and how those effects are worsened by climate change. Animals, including insects, fish, reptiles, birds, humans, and other mammals, are constantly simultaneously exposed to synthetic chemicals and to the impacts of climate change, including rising temperatures. Both of these stressors can harm fertility, and many of the impacts found are similar across species, such as effects on sperm and eggs. The stress caused by these exposures also impacts overall health, harming animals' ability to adapt to a changing environment and worsening global biodiversity loss. To build a sustainable future, we must recognize that chemicals, once released, don't simply disappear. Instead, they contribute to the larger issue of driving humanity towards the exceedance of planetary boundaries when considered in combination with climate change and other planetary-level impacts. While climate change and toxic endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs, are both individually well established as health threats, few studies have examined the implications of the widespread simultaneous exposure experienced by humans and wildlife. Many EDCs can also impact health across multiple generations, meaning their harm continues long after the original exposure. To better tackle the issues of EDCs, the authors of this study emphasize the need for strong regulations that address chemicals by class, rather than individually. So, climate change affects fertility in animal and human species. Probably a decent portion of us already might have had an idea of that, especially when it came to animals. I mean, habitat destruction and climate change has already been pretty catastrophic for animal species, but it's affecting human fertility and human reproduction as well. And I think it's easy for us to take a look at I don't want to say the falling birth rates or whatever, because I don't want to be one of those guys. And all of the other white guy podcasters, or whatever you want to call them, who were a news program, not a podcast necessarily. But all of the other white guy podcasters talking about fertility rates and all that, all like, oh, we have to have more white babies or whatever. This is more of a concern of people losing that human interaction that we used to have as a result of increasing alienation from each other. That has in large ways been driven by industry and just our late-stage capitalist experience, but now also we have the science to show that lack of fertility in humans is directly related to the effects that industry and capitalism has had on the actual environment itself. Toxic chemicals and climate change, etc., being ingested and being consumed, and just changing the way that human habitat has damaged our reproductive ability. I just looked up IVF rates are very common. Well, relatively common. About 1 in 36 kids born in the United States is an IVF child. It's about 3% of American babies. About 100,000 last year, or no, in 2024, 100,000, over 100,000 children were born via IVF, which is fine, no big deal. But you know, it's worth considering, of especially given the high costs, both financially and emotionally, of pursuing IVF, that those costs might have been able to be avoided if we had more equitable society that cared more about the people rather than short-term corporate profits. Of course, IVF itself is a corporate, I don't want to say corporate scheme, but it is, by nature of being a pharmaceutical or healthcare procedure done in a capitalist system with all privatized healthcare, it is a for-profit regimen. We'll say it's a for-profit regimen that families pay in order to try to have children as a result of both normal things and then also the complications brought on by, sorry, I got distracted, big bug, and normal complications brought on by now climate change and toxic waste. Again, this isn't just limited to humans. We talk about it because it's important for us and for our future and the continuation. It's a very big piece of imagery to say that capitalism is killing human fertility, is literally decreasing our ability to stay on this earth as a species. But we're not the only species at risk here. Tons and tons of other animals are suffering this as well, particularly egged creatures, birds, lizards, fish, and then also mammals as well. And the decrease in fertility and whatnot also correlates with or is probably caused by a decrease in sexual interaction in people. They're just, I don't know, people, I don't want to sound like the late Prime Minister of Japan here, but people aren't hooking up anymore. Well, anymore, as if no one is. But people aren't having sex as much as they used to and are seriously overestimating the amount of sex everybody else is having. And in some ways, it's probably great. I mean, teen pregnancy rates are way down, which is fantastic. A big part of that is birth control, yeah, but another big part of that is that a lot of teen pregnancy came from sexual abuse within the family. So seeing that going down is fantastic. And probably this means that a bunch of other people are focusing on their studies instead of starting families early, which we know this is one of the reasons why, you know, we have more late parents in places where women can get higher education, can pursue higher education, because they're usually not pursuing building a family until after they're done with their education. So rather than starting at 22, 25, you know, starting later into their 30s perhaps. All of which is fine, and that is a changing way that we as people engage with each other and engage, I don't want to say in our environment, but within our society. Society has changed to allow new and different opportunities, largely of which have been, well, maybe not largely, many of which have been good. And a lot of progress has been made in equality and then also in protections of children. But, you know, we're not necessarily protecting ourselves on a biological or genetic level when it comes to, you know, again, climate change or the climate catastrophe. And we know that human reproduction isn't, again, I can't reiterate this enough. We talk about human reproduction because it's so very relevant to us, but really it's just downstream of the same problems that other species on Earth are having, and we need that biodiversity in order to have a good, healthy, and stable ecosystem, of which we are one part of. So if the animals in an ecosystem aren't able to reproduce as much, that's going to be a huge problem, whether or not those animals are humans or if they are birds or other mammals. With any luck, it'll be cats. We don't need more feral or stray cats. They're horrible for local ecology. But, you know, we shouldn't be seeing these chemicals and toxins being dumped into cat populations either. Should have more responsible cat owners and more protections for the environment to protect against invasive species, like like cats and others. So hopefully this will be a good motivation for people who might not care as much about animals as the rest of us, or biodiversity, or might not even understand that they have to care about climate catastrophe and to care about toxins and pollution in our human habitats. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Key inflation gauge jumps to highest level in 3 years as Iran war spikes gas prices. April 30th, 2026, via the AP News. An inflation gauge monitored by the Fed rose 0.7% in March from February, up sharply from the previous month, the Commerce Department said on Thursday. Compared with a year ago, prices rose 3.5%, the biggest increase in almost 3 years. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core inflation rose 0.3% in March from February, and was 3.2% higher than a year earlier. The annual figure is above February's reading of 3%. The jump in gas prices has pushed inflation further away from the Fed's 2% target. Outgoing Fed Chair Jerome Powell signaled at a news conference Wednesday that the central bank would likely be on hold for months as it evaluates the impact of the Iran war. The Fed has kept its key short-term interest rates unchanged after cutting it 3 times last year. The central bank typically keeps rates elevated or even raises them to combat higher inflation. At the same time, Thursday's report showed that Americans' incomes, wages, business income, and government benefits increased 6.6%, a solid increase but slower than the rate of inflation, for the second straight month. The decline illustrates the other risk created by higher gas prices. The extra costs will likely siphon away spending that would have gone to other products and services, potentially slowing the economy. For now, consumers have been bolstered by healthy tax refunds, which were lifted by last year's tax cut legislation, but much of that benefit is being eaten up by the higher prices at the pump. A year that was set to benefit from tailwinds associated with a large tax cut and boom in artificial intelligence-led investment has been partially derailed by the impact of what as of today is an adverse and growing supply shock caused by the war in Iran, said Joe Bruce-Willis, chief economist at RSM, a tax and advisory firm. Unfortunately, war and the supply shock that ensued has altered the probable growth path this year. Bruce-Willis now expects the economy to expand just 1.7% this year, down from an earlier estimate of 2.4%. Gas prices jumped nearly 21% in March from the previous month, the report said, while grocery prices actually slipped 0.1%. Clothing costs climbed 1% in March. The average price of gas nationwide rose to $4.30 a gallon Thursday, according to AAA, up from $2.98 before the war began. U.S. oil prices cooled a bit Thursday morning, but still topped $105 a barrel, up from about $67 before the war. Still, the Fed typically pays more attention to core prices, and how much energy costs feed through the core inflation in the coming months will be a major factor in how the central bank decides on its next moves. We are very well aware that people are experiencing higher gas prices all over the country now, Powell said Wednesday, and that hurts. Thursday's report also showed that consumer spending soared 0.9% last month, with most of the increase reflecting the sharp jump in prices. But it also indicates Americans lifted their spending a bit even after adjusting for inflation, a sign of consumer resilience. The economy expanded at a modest 2% annual rate in the first 3 months of the year, the Commerce Department also said on Thursday, up from an expansion of just 0.5% in last year's final quarter, when growth was held back by the 6-week government shutdown. Still, consumer spending growth slowed compared with the final 3 months of last year. Off the rip, I think it's important to clarify that the people who are paying the highest prices right now are the people of Iran. I don't mean financially. They're the ones who are dying for this war. Americans in particular, but pretty much everyone else as well, gets to sit at home and complain about grocery store prices, gas prices, availability of items, longer shipping times, yada, yada, yada. We don't have to worry about, the United States just blew up my daughter's elementary school. So whenever we're talking about the war and we're talking about the costs here in America, we have to always keep in mind, first and foremost, what we are paying is a monetary cost, not a blood price. And that is always the more expensive price to pay. Iran is doing this for us, in many ways, us as the global working class, by beating the American hegemony back out of the Middle East and helping to repel the U.S. empire. So, good luck to Iran and all of their friends and allies, such as Hezbollah, Ansarullah, Hamas, and the Palestinian forces there. Syrians, the Iraqis, etc. So, and that's important for us to remember whenever we talk about these costs, that we're paying higher in gas because we're killing people. Because people are being killed and they are dying. And that is far more important. And the red price over the green price is always going to be a bigger price. I can't overstate that. I can't reiterate that enough, that when we talk about our costs, we should also look at the costs of the people that we are killing. And it's important to note that we are killing them unnecessarily. Obviously, you already know this, but Iran never posed any threat to the United States, never had interest of posing any threat to the United States, or more importantly, to Americans. What they threaten are American imperial interests abroad, which are not necessary to the life of American citizens. American imperialism can and often does provide us with creature comforts and with commodities for pointless spending and personal entertainment. But it does not provide us with safety, security, does not really provide us with food, does not provide us with fuel, does not provide us with anything that we actually need, but rather it uses our surplus to commit atrocities across the globe in order to keep us spending on these commodities. This is the point of American warfare in general, is to spend money on commodities, whether it is directly by creating new markets for oil and for corporate interests, or if it is by creating wartime situations in order to basically subsidize the military-industrial complex and just transfer wealth from the working class to the capitalists who own the war machinery. Downstream of that comes personal costs that we pay at the gas station or the grocery store or the clothing store, or that we see in reduced wages via inflation, devaluing the money that we're already making. So not only does it limit our ability to purchase and acquire commodities, like it says, the economic slowdown that will stop us from being able to buy new things that we might want because we're spending it all on necessities, it means that we have less to go around. And that comes, at least this time, comes from a chokehold on the oil market that Iran has decided to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, or lock down the Strait of Hormuz. They've always had control over it, as we see. They've decided to lock down the Strait of Hormuz, which has strangled our oil consumption, or our oil availability to meet our consumption, which has driven up the price of transportation in particular, which makes everything more expensive, inflation, etc. And we're doing this to satisfy American ego. We're doing this to protect American imperial interests in the Middle East, and we're doing so to run cover for Israel, which cannot survive without the United States. So your tax dollars that you pay, if you're an American, go, and if you're in a lot of other Western countries as well. We know that our Vietnamese viewers, luckily, are not to blame for this. But if you're an American viewer, your tax dollars go, of course, to the United States government, which spends them on warcraft that we use to wage war on Iran, not necessarily on behalf of Israel. It's a very simplistic way of viewing it. Israel works for us, so it's on our behalf, just, kind of laundered through Israel. So that way the United States can maintain control over the markets and the natural resources and the labor in the labor force in the Near East, Middle East, West Asia, etc. So your higher prices at the pump are because of American imperialism. You're not paying higher prices as the cost of keeping Americans safe. I've seen far too many people think, we have to stop Iran from getting a nuke. First of all, we don't. It's not our business. If they want to build a nuke, we have them. France has them. Britain has them. China has them. Russia has them. Israel has them. North Korea has them. Oh, India and Pakistan have them as well. The north of Korea. So, 9 other countries have them. What's wrong with Iran getting it too? Not my business. Also, they have no interest in hitting American targets in the United States. They want to hit our overseas military bases. Well, that's war. Maybe we shouldn't have put them in other countries to occupy and control them. And just as importantly, Iran doesn't want to build nukes. We know this to be a fact. Iran doesn't build nukes because it opposes their religion. The late Ayatollah put a fatwa on the production of all weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons and also chemical and biological weapons, believing them to be an affront to God. That's all there is to it. Oh, they've enriched 60% enriched uranium. Yes, they use it for medicine. There's often the myth that 60% enriched uranium doesn't have any civilian applications. It doesn't have direct civilian applications such as in power plants. What it does have applications in is medicine. Now, I don't fully understand the medical aspects. You need the isotopes for the medications and the radiology and stuff. How specifically, I don't know. I'm neither a nuclear scientist nor a doctor. I don't really understand the science behind the medicine. But that's how you make it. And Iran is leading the world in nuclear medicine. So that's what they use it for. Us bombing and warring against Iran is not about keeping people safe. It is about keeping American imperial interests safe. That means Wall Street's interests, not yours, safe. And making the world safe for global capital, not safe for democracy or freedom or for American lives in general. Lastly, just like we saw happen all the other instances of great inflation and warfare, this is a huge wealth transfer from the working class to the ruling class. It's our money that they are siphoning away by raising the prices and pocketing. And that's all there is to it. Prices go up, we pay more, they make more money. We saw this during COVID, when everyone was suddenly making huge record quarterly profits. Why? Because when prices go up, they make more money, and we don't make more money. That money never gets back to us. It gets pocketed and hoarded by the wealth. There's immense wealth transfers from the working class, the people who do all the living and working and make the world run, to the people who steal from us in order to live in possibly lavish lifestyles at our expense. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization, and that means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Bill banning whites-only housing passes Pennsylvania House by 1 vote. April 28, 2026, via ABC. A bill banning white-only housing passed the Pennsylvania House on Tuesday, despite not a single Republican supporting the measure. House Bill 2103 would close a loophole in the state that could let white nationalist groups establish communities under the guise of a private club or member-only organization by blocking such groups from restricting membership by race, color, and national origin to deny equal access to housing, employment, and public accommodations. The bill also expands anti-discrimination protections for employment, housing, and public accommodations to a person's sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity or expression. It passed on the House floor by 101 to 100 vote. A single Democrat, Representative Frank Burns of Cambria, joined every Republican in opposing the bill. Representative Ben Waxman of Philadelphia proposed the bill after Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin said a preliminary review found that Return to the Land, a whites-only community that operates as a private membership or association, had not broken any laws by building a segregated community in the state. Legal loopholes are making it possible for discrimination to still exist today on the basis of religion, Waxman said. Let me be clear, though, religion should never be used as a pretext for hatred or bigotry. Eric Orwell, president of Return to the Land, wrote on social media earlier this month that he's not fazed by legislation seeking to ban the group. He accused lawmakers who support the bills of being anti-white and said they'll eventually pay for their betrayal of our nation. The bill now heads to the Senate for consideration, where Waxman encouraged colleagues to pass it. Return to the land, they say. How about return to Europe? How about that land? Can you return to that land rather than settling and occupying North America? No, because the white supremacists want this country to be theirs and theirs alone. The fact that they are finding legal loopholes to make this happen is maybe not surprising exactly on an intellectual level, but it is astonishingly brazen. And it's good to see that people are pushing back on this. They should. I'm glad to see that even the government is saying, oh, shoot, this is a problem. Let's lock these down. And it's going to prevent housing discrimination against not just people of color or ethnic or racial minorities, but also, hopefully, members of our LGBTQ community and other minority groups in the United States, whether it be religious or based on gender or sexual orientation, or if they just want to exclude certain types of people, male or female, from, and let's be real, it's going to be excluding women from participating in these communities. And Pennsylvania, of all places, also kind of surprised me just a little bit. Pennsylvania is for those of you who aren't very familiar with Pennsylvania, it's a what we call a purple state. There are huge chunks of it that are very deeply conservative and right-wing, and there are other huge chunks of it that are very liberal to progressive. I wish they were more left-wing than they are, but we'll settle for progressive at this time. And so it's about equal balance. A population of, offhand, I want to say 13 to 14 million people, largely concentrated in urban pockets in the four corners of the state, and then some places in the center, and then the rest is open wilderness. Famously, Pennsylvania has a whole section called the Wilds, which covers 25% of the country and has less than 4% country. 25% of the state has less than 4% of the population. So, and these rural areas are, unfortunately, because they're so passionately neglected, they're often reactionary and gravitate towards right-wing populist viewpoints and strange enclavish behaviors that promote things like white nationalism and white supremacy. So you'd think Pennsylvania would have purged that at Gettysburg, but I guess not. And it's good that people are challenging this and that the state of Pennsylvania is trying to nip that in the bud. But it's beyond appalling that a vote to ban white-only neighborhoods would pass by one vote. One would think that maybe more Republicans would be opposed to the idea of white-only neighborhoods, at the very least on a moral basis, or maybe even on a basis of, oh, well, if they could do white-only neighborhoods, maybe what if they do someone else-only neighborhoods, no white neighborhoods? I don't know, something stupid like that. But no, every single one of the Republicans in the House, who I'm going to assume are almost entirely, if not entirely white, supported the idea of being able to legally permit white enclaves, effectively segregation and apartheid in Pennsylvania. And they almost did it if they had one more Democrat flip. Instead, it's 100 to 101. Difference of one vote. And now it's going to the Senate in order to see if that passes into law. I've been a long-time hater of the Senate system. It's leftovers, I feel, of the House of Lords from England. We don't need many aristocrats who hold way too much power and are relatively unaccountable to the people in our representative democracy. But I digress. This is just another place where the Senate can fail. course, on the other hand, we've seen times when the Senate being another check before things get passed has been good, so I don't know. But coming back to the fact of how brazen this is, and maybe this was always going on, and just as I've gotten older, I've become more attuned to it rather than it has been happening more, which is probably also the case. The fact that people actively push to create white-only neighborhoods in America is, again, and on a legal framework of whites-only neighborhoods, because of course this is where all your suburbs come from. All those shitty little suburbs that you can't walk around and can't take the bus to, can't take the train to, the idyllic American town that we all saw mocked ruthlessly and accurately in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia as being a place of inane and almost barbarous in its civility. These kind of communities were built and constructed in order to segregate places without openly having segregation. So white people were the only ones who were able to afford it, especially through the GI Bill, which was often not extended to black service members. And so they were able to leave their communities that were becoming desegregated and move into car-accessible neighborhoods outside of the cities, where oftentimes impoverished people of color, or people of color who have been impoverished due to systemic racism in particular, were often unable to afford motor vehicles that would allow them to move to that community, let alone being able to afford buying property in that community in the first place. Again, in many cases because the GI Bill was not properly extended to black servicemen. So, trying to recreate that, but now with fences and laws through legal loopholes for clubs and such that allow you to racially discriminate. That's something I've often had a problem with in the United States, is these ethnic clubs. They feel like an opportunity to ethnically discriminate, or to discriminate against women for these male-only clubs. Yeah, we know what you're doing. It's about hating women. It's not about being a place for men or a place for your ethnic heritage or whatever. And this is something that everybody in the community should be railing against. We should all be appalled by this, and we should all be vocally and openly appalled by this. People in the community should not feel comfortable associating with these ideas, espousing these ideas, or speaking them in public. And perhaps even more importantly, they should be thoroughly shaken out of having these ideas in the first place and taught and educated, re-educated better, or at the very least will settle for being scared into submission to get rid of the rot, which is white supremacy in the United States. Of course, to get rid of white supremacy in the United States, we have to get rid of the United States. Hey, did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. What to know about hantavirus, the illness linked to a cruise ship outbreak. May 5th, 2026 via AP News. An outbreak aboard a cruise ship of a rare rodent-borne illness called hantavirus has left 3 people dead and sickened others. The virus, which usually spreads when people inhale contaminated residue of rodent droppings, has been confirmed in 2 of the cases. The World Health Organization said detailed investigations of the cruise ship outbreak are ongoing, including further laboratory testing and other work aimed at determining the source of exposure. Officials suspect the first infected person likely contracted the virus before boarding the ship. The WHO says the risk to the global population from this outbreak is low. Hantavirus is not easily spread between people. Hantavirus is mainly spread by contact with rodents or their urine, saliva, or droppings, particularly when the material is disturbed and becomes airborne, posing a risk of inhalation. People are typically exposed to hantavirus around their homes, cabins, or sheds, especially when cleaning out enclosed spaces with little ventilation or exploring areas where there are mouse droppings. The WHO says that while it rarely happens, hantaviruses can also spread directly between people. There's one strain endemic to Argentina and Chile that does have the ability to transmit person to person. The Andes virus is typically contained because it would spread through only close contact, such as sharing a bed or sharing food. An infection can rapidly progress and become life-threatening. Experts say it can start with symptoms that include a fever, chills, muscle aches, and maybe a headache, much like how the flu would feel. Symptoms of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome usually show between 1 and 8 weeks after contact with an infected rodent. As the infection progresses, patients might experience tightness in the chest, as the lungs fill with fluid. The other syndrome caused by hantavirus, known as hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, which can cause bleeding, high fever, and kidney failure, usually develops within a week or two after exposure. Death rates vary by which hantavirus causes the illness. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome is fatal in about 35% of people infected, while the death rate for hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome varies from 1% to 15% of patients, according to the CDC. There is no specific treatment or cure, but early medical attention can increase the chances of survival. Despite years of research, many questions have yet to be answered, including why it can be mild for some people and severe for others, and how antibodies are developed. Some researchers have been following patients over long periods of time in hopes of finding a treatment. What researchers do know is that rodent exposure is key. The best way to avoid the germ is to minimize contact with rodents and their droppings. Use protective gloves and a bleach solution for cleaning up rodent droppings. Public health experts caution against sweeping or vacuuming, which can cause virus particles to get into the air. The long and the short of it is, and you've probably figured this out by now, the hantavirus is not really something to be all that worried about. Now granted, I personally said this to my friends when COVID first came onto the scene, so if I'm wrong, blow us up in the comments in a few months. But all of the scientists and all of the research suggests this isn't really that big of a deal. Obviously, if you get it, then you are going to have a problem personally, but spreading it is more difficult, and spreading it from human to human is almost unheard of. Except down in Argentina and Chile, down in the Andes Mountains, where you have the exactly one strain of it or so. 58 people died worldwide last year of hantavirus. 28 of them were in Argentina. So, and we know Argentina is not doing a good job of taking care of their people or their public health. Javier Milei sucks and is horrible. And his neoliberal reforms, or whatever he wants to call them, and his anarcho-capitalist behaviors and all of his... Regardless, we're not going to talk about Argentine politics. I'm just going to get annoyed. He's not taking good care of his people. So we can reasonably assume that a few of those deaths might have been more prevented if the country weren't falling into shambles right now under Milei's leadership. The other place where, if you live in the Americas, you might have to take some care is in the Four Corners region in the American Southwest. Just like the article said, if you have mice in your house, use gloves, use bleach, clean it up. Don't use a vacuum, don't use a broom. Don't get the little particles all up in the air and inhale them. Just take some precautions, and then probably set out some traps to get rid of the mice or to remove them from your property. Remember, for live traps, you have to take the mouse away a minimum of 2 miles, or else they may be able to find their way back in. So take them out and dump them somewhere else. Someone else will be able to... I don't know, I guess it'll be someone else's problem at that point. But it's saliva, urine, and fecal matter from rodents, in which this is largely being spread. The ship itself had an outbreak because of either rodents on the ship, or more likely, someone caught it beforehand. What symptoms took like 1 to 8 weeks to pop up. So perhaps someone got infected, didn't even know, got on the cruise, and then was in intimate quarters with other people for a week. And that was that. Them taking them off the boat to get medical treatment is not going to be the end of the world, because it's difficult for it to pass from person to person. And again, if they're being medevaced, that means doctors are going to be taking care of it, and they're going to be taking precautions to make sure that they don't get infected or spread the infection. We don't need to bomb the ship from orbit or anything else. It's a cruise ship, though, so it couldn't hurt. I think we should probably try it. give it a real shot. Cruise ships are terrible polluters, so I guess at that point, blowing it up into the ocean is not the most helpful either. But it's not much to worry about. It is if you have it. It is if anyone you are intimately close with has it. But the likelihood of that being someone who also watches this video is infinitesimally small. And it's treatable. It's not curable, but it's treatable. The symptoms, at least, are treatable. And ultimately, it's not that big of a deal. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to be the next COVID. It's just another one of those incidents that pops up that due to COVID we've all become so much more sensitive to. Viruses are really strange. I wish anyone knew anything at all about them. Freaky little things, I wouldn't even call them creatures, maybe, that we share this planet with, that in some ways makes life a lot more interesting, in other ways makes life a lot more scary. Just one of those things. The virus is not going to kill you. It's not going to cause a pandemic, and we're not looking at COVID Part 2, as much as maybe some of the corporations might be itching to see us give them all our money again. If you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. Supreme Court restores abortion pill access, for now. May 4th, 2026, via Politico. In a brief order Monday, Justice Samuel Alito put on hold a decision by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that limited how patients could obtain the pills. Alito's order is in effect through May 11th, giving all 9 justices time to consider requests from the drugs manufacturers to keep the appeals court's ruling on ice while the Supreme Court considers whether to take up the issue. The Trump administration, which had asked lower courts to hold off on ruling until the Food and Drug Administration completes an internal review of the drug safety, has yet to react to the Fifth Circuit decision. Alito, who wrote the majority opinion in the case that overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, gave Louisiana until May 7th to respond to the emergency appeals from the 2 companies that make mifepristone, Danco and GenBioPro. He's likely to refer the request for a longer-term stay to the full court for action. Pharmaceutical companies argued that the Supreme Court must intervene in order to prevent regulatory chaos, saying the Fifth Circuit's decision was deeply unsettling to drug sponsors, healthcare providers, patients, and the public, all of whom rely on the FDA's exercise of scientific judgment and orderly administration of the nation's complex system of drug regulation. The High Court's move returns to doctors in states with protections for the procedure, for now, the ability to prescribe by telehealth a drug used in more than 2/3 of abortions by telehealth, and to send it by mail across state lines. That has become one of the most common ways for patients to circumvent state bans on the procedure, a practice Louisiana argued in court threatens its sovereignty and the safety of its residents. Planned Parenthood was one of the many abortion providers and advocacy groups to both celebrate the ruling and warn that the legal back and forth is sowing mass fear and confusion. When mifepristone access returns to where on Friday morning, the whiplash and chaos that patients and providers are navigating have already had real consequences for real people's lives and futures, said Alexis McGill-Johnson, the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Some telehealth abortion providers paused their services entirely after Friday's Fifth Circuit ruling. Others pivoted to only sending the second pill in the 2-pill regimen, misoprostol, which can end pregnancies on its own but has a slightly higher failure rate and worse side effects than in combination with mifepristone. Misoprostol is more difficult to ban or restrict because it is used for an array of other purposes, including treating ulcers and stopping hemorrhages. Misoprostol-only abortions are common in other countries, and studies have found it to be mostly safe and effective. As all sides await further action from the Supreme Court, anti-abortion activists, who are already frustrated with the Trump administration for not acting unilaterally to impose restrictions on mifepristone or ban the drug entirely, expressed outrage about the administrative stay. Kristen Hawkins, president of Students for Life of America, blasted Alito for allowing pill pushers to receive every benefit of the doubt. Hawkins and other activists are pressuring the Justice Department to cut off all abortion medications by reviving the Comstock Act, a long-dormant anti-obscenity law from the 1800s that prohibits mail delivery of any abortifacient. All right, so we do have an update on this one, because again, it was set to expire on either the 7th or the 11th. And as of Monday, the Supreme Court has basically said they are going to leave access to the abortion pill untouched until at least tomorrow, while they wait for some other things to happen. They're considering they're probably going to extend it again until they maybe properly have to go to court for it. The crackdown on abortion access is, as many women will point out to you, largely about controlling women and controlling access to women. Pregnancy, in many cases, removes a woman's financial freedom and even sometimes her freedom of mobility, being that she will inevitably be tied to taking care of a child, and it will reduce her options and in many cases leave her dependent on a man. And that's kind of the whole gist here. There's a lot more to it than that, but in many cases, not a whole lot more. The religious aspects of it are, like all the other religious aspects, a superstructure that conceals the actual structure beneath, which is patriarchal control of women and their bodies. One thing to take note, if this does go into effect, the AP News article that I just read suggests that they think that the Louisiana appeal is going to be upheld, basically, and that people won't be able to get the abortion pills mailed to them from doctors in other states. I think that's probably what the Supreme Court will end up ruling. And if that happens, you can get the other pill and the 2-pill regimen. That does work most of the time. It's not as effective, and based on the article we read tonight, kind of sucks. There are a lot more adverse reactions to it that are incredibly unpleasant and can require medical attention or a visit to a doctor, which is why it comes in the 2-pill regimen. But in a lot of other countries, it's just the 1 pill, and it just sucks. It sucks, but it works. And if that's how it has to be, then that's how it has to be for you. That's the option that you should consider pursuing. Again, talk to your doctor first, obviously, before going that route, if you have to. But this isn't something that should be required. We shouldn't have to, and we definitely shouldn't allow the government to control women's bodies like this. We shouldn't allow them to restrict our access to healthcare on their religious terms, and of course on their patriarchal terms, more importantly. And on that note, it is very interesting how this article frames it, the Politico article, because what the appeals being made to the Supreme Court are not necessarily about the rights of people, the rights of women and their care. They say it's deeply unsettling to drug sponsors, healthcare providers, first and foremost. Those two first, and then patients and the public. Pharmaceutical companies are suing over this because, of course, they make profits on this medication. Our healthcare system is designed to make profit. It is a for-profit enterprise. So, sure, and this medication works, and you should have access to it just because some evil cretin is making it, or some evil cretin owns the lab in which it is made by workers like you and I. But the money is the backer here. This will be bad for corporate business is more of a winning argument to the Supreme Court than this will be bad for women in the community. Because as you already know, they don't care about women in the community. That's why they overturned Roe v. Wade. They don't care about women in the community. They care about controlling women in the community. And giving women freedom of choice of their own bodies is not on their agenda. However, when that freedom of choice directly, or controlling that freedom of choice, restricting that freedom of choice, also restricts corporate profits, but we'll see what they love more, or what they prefer, if they love money more than they hate women. An interesting question, because we both know that they feel both of those very, very strongly. So, it is funny, maybe not entirely inaccurate, for these Students for Life of America to call the pharmaceutical companies pill pushers. That's kind of funny. I think it is not true necessarily in this context, but we all know from the opioid crisis that it is oftentimes true. And these guys, the Students for Life of America, they don't care about life of America. They don't care about life in America. They care about, like we said earlier, they care about white life in America and the continued production of white children, not just for cheap labor force, but to maintain the majority that they need in order to keep the state functioning as a white nationalist settler colony. Where else do we see this? Israel. This is why they have the IDF squads that go and harvest reproductive fluids from dead Israelis, because they need to have their ethnic majority in order to set the tone of the country. They, like many white Americans, Israelis are scared of being the minority, becoming a minority in their own country, and are completely reluctant to come to terms with the fact that they are settler colonists and the descendants of settler colonists occupying someone else's land and abusing it for their own pleasure. And in doing so, they, of course, extend that abuse of the land to the abuse of each other. And that is what we see here, and ultimately devolves into the abuse of self as well, with the way that we poison our own environments. So all these things are related. We separate them by article for clarity, but they are all related. And this is just another way for the far-right and reactionary elements of the community to control women and to oppress their freedom of choice and their freedom of movement, both economic and, in many cases, physical. And they might win. Luckily, we have that backup pill, which again, look up the side effects. Just make sure that you know that it kind of sucks to do, but gotta do what you gotta do. This week's book recommendation is Orientalism by Edward Said. Said, a Palestinian-American academic, argues in this book that the general framework through which Westerners view the East has been shaped by colonialism and imperialism rather than truth, and as a result, we are often steeped in bias against and contempt for the peoples and cultures of the Orient that we have been trained to instinctively see as backward and inferior. Trump administration shutters DHS Watchdog amid rampant and growing detainee abuse. May 4th, 2026, via Common Dreams. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security is officially closing its watchdog for immigrant detention abuse, even as reports of excessive force, deadly neglect, and other maltreatment by agency personnel soar under the Trump administration. Citing an internal email, HuffPost's Dave Jamieson reported Monday that DHS is shutting down its Office of the Immigration Detention Ombudsman, OIDO, which was established by an act of Congress and signed into law by President Donald Trump in 2020 as part of the massive federal spending package known as the Consolidated Appropriations Act. Jamieson added that the communication said the OIDO is in the process of removing all its public signage and ending its inspection, and that the agency's website was down. The email attributed OIDO's closure to a lack of federal funding in the Homeland Security Appropriations package that ended the recent 76-day shutdown affecting the agency. Largely pushed through by congressional Democrats, OIDO was designed to be independent from both U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The office was given the power to receive detainee complaints, investigate alleged abuse or misconduct, inspect detention facilities, and report systemic problems to DHS leaders and Congress. OIDO emerged amid widespread abuse of detained migrants during the first Trump administration, including deaths in custody, family separation, overcrowding, and other mistreatment. Since returning to office for a second term, Trump has overseen the dismantling of the agency, arguing that it hinders immigration enforcement. The administration's efforts to dilute OIDO's power have triggered legal action arguing that, since it was created by Congress, the agency cannot be abolished without congressional consent. DHS detainees, especially those ICE lockups, report abuses including inadequate or delayed medical care, physical attacks and excessive force, sexual abuse and harassment, solitary confinement misuse, overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, intimidation and retaliation following complaints, abuse of pregnant women and children, denial of access to lawyers, denial of family contact, and denial of food, water, hygiene, or medication. Last year was the deadliest in ICE detention in about 2 decades, with more than 30 deaths reported in custody. So far this year, at least 18 more detainees had reportedly died in ICE custody. OIDO isn't the only DHS watchdog under attack by the Trump administration. The Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, CRCL, and Office of Citizenship and Immigration Services Ombudsman have also been targeted. One former CRCL employee who was placed on administrative leave due to funding cuts, said in a recent court filing that the agency is unable to conduct meaningful investigations into alleged civil rights and civil liberties violations committed by its personnel. As an example, they noted the accusations of excessive force by the ICE agent who fatally shot Minneapolis resident Renee Good last year. In my experience, investigations into systemic issues like these required significant staff resources, which CRCL no longer has to devote to these important issues of civil rights and civil liberties, the official told Federal News Network earlier this year. Nor does CRCL have the resources to conduct multidisciplinary on-site investigations at detention facilities, the need for which is greater than it has ever been, as both the number of detention facilities and the number of people detained has skyrocketed. I think it's very easy for us to recognize that one of the reasons why this is being shuttered is in order to cover up and to continue the violence against immigrants and, honestly, the violence against people of color, particularly Hispanics, in the United States. Obviously, this is the big driving force behind it. But I think also, on a related note, it is because the government doesn't care. And I think that might be even, I don't know, maybe that's worse. That the government recognizes that there are abuses going on. There are specifically excessive force, deadly neglect, another maltreatment, detention abuse, and what specifically did they say? Inadequate or delayed medical care, physical attacks, excessive force, sexual abuse, harassment, solitary confinement misuse, overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, intimidation, retaliation following complaints, abuse of pregnant women, abuse of children, denial of access to lawyers, denial of family contact, denial of food, denial of water, denial of hygiene, and denial of medication. And they know that this is happening, and this is largely the point. Like we've said before, cruelty is the point. But they don't care about people interned. They don't care whether or not they are being adequately fed, adequately watered, adequately cared for at all, because they don't care at all about the well-being of people in prison. And we know that they don't care about people in prison pretty much flat out across the board. I find it almost comical that they have here solitary confinement misuse. And we all know solitary confinement is a form of torture that they use to punish people with. There are no natural uses of solitary confinement. It is cruel, though unfortunately not an unusual punishment. And the government just straight up doesn't care this is happening to people. They don't care that happens to regular prisoners. They certainly don't care that happens to what we might generously call political prisoners, or people put in ethnic concentration camps, because they just don't care. If they are treated well, fine, whatever. If they're not treated well, who cares? That's the general premise of the U.S. We know this because back under the Biden administration, who did not have this watchdog, interestingly enough. No, Biden did. Obama didn't. But Biden did because it's 2020. Under the Biden administration, nobody cared. The general public did not care about what was happening to the immigrants in internment camps, just like they didn't care what was happening to the kids in cages when Obama was in office. You round up Hispanic people, treat them horribly with your thugs and goons, beat the shit out of them, abuse them, throw them into prisons, separate families, do all this. As long as the person in charge is wearing a blue tie, no big deal. Put on a red tie, now suddenly it's a problem. And for much of the public, and getting rid of the oversight here is just full commitment into that. Full commitment of what was started under Bush, exacerbated to an insane level by Obama, the deporter-in-chief, and then made so incredibly public with Trump, and then completely flat-out ignored once again with Joe Biden. And remember, his Vice President, Kamala Harris, promised that were she elected, she would continue the exact same programs and escalate. She would escalate to the levels which Trump has escalated now. And we should remember that as we're coming up on our midterms here, whether or not our representatives and congressmen, senators, and whoever else is up for re-election in your community, how they stand on the treatment of immigrants. And not just the treatment of immigrants in prisons or in these internment camps, in these ICE facilities, but treatment of them in general. Because when we don't care about them when they live in our communities, if we don't care about them when they are our neighbors, then how can we pretend to care when they are forcibly removed from our communities and put into prison? So we need to really fight against the white supremacy, against the hatred, violence, mistrust, and distaste for immigrants, whether they are legal or otherwise. We have to make sure that we're fighting for them, so that way they don't end up in concentration camps where they are mistreated horribly. And, they're just straight up not going to be taken care of. That and the CRCL and the other one, Office of Citizenship and Immigration Services Ombudsman. These groups they just don't have the money. Of course, we always have the money for war, right? We always have the money to bomb Iran. We always have the money to dump into AI programs to prolong and proliferate war and oppression and surveillance and all that. But we don't have the money suddenly to have someone just to go look at concentration camps and say, wow, they're treated pretty bad in there, and then not do anything about it because we haven't been doing anything about it anyway. So really I don't even know what to say other than, people are dying. People have been dying. We've seen them die on the streets. They're dying in the prisons at the highest rates so far. Last year, 30 people. This year already 18. It's the first 4 months of the year. You can do the math on that. It's looking pretty bad. So shuttering these organizations, not just because they want to hurt people, and they do. You already know that, so I didn't feel I had to elaborate all that much. Obviously, they want to hurt people, and everyone who doesn't want to hurt people don't really care. And they feel far more comfortable not knowing about it than knowing and not doing anything about it. Hey comrades, let's remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. Aside from simply exercising, we have to make sure that we're taking care of our bodies by maintaining the intake of healthy substances too. This week, let's focus on eating right by cutting out fast food and sugary drinks, as well as smoking or vaping. U.S. Navy turns to AI firm Domino for options to counter Iranian mines. May 1st, 2026 via the New Arab. The U.S. Navy is ramping up its AI capabilities to hunt for Iranian mines in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical shipping lanes, a recently awarded contract shows. President Donald Trump has said the U.S. Navy is clearing Iranian mines from the Strait, a vital sea route for oil shipments, whose disruption is increasingly threatening the global economy. Sweeping for underwater explosives could take months despite a tenuous ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran in their 2-month-long war. The up to $100 million contract for the San Francisco artificial intelligence company Domino Data Lab could quicken this process with software that can teach underwater drones to identify new types of mines in a matter of days. Mine hunting used to be a job for ships, Thomas Robinson, Domino's chief operating officer, said in an interview with Reuters. It's becoming a job for AI. The Navy is paying for the platform that lets it train, govern, and field that AI at a speed required for contested waters that block global trade and imperil sailors. Last week, the U.S. Navy awarded the up to $99.7 million contract to expand Domino's role as the AI backbone of the Navy's Project Ammo, accelerated machine learning for maritime operations, a program to make underwater mine detection faster, more accurate, and less dependent on human sailors. The software integrates data from multiple sensor types, including side-scan sonar and visual imaging systems, and allows the Navy to monitor how well various AI detection models are performing in the field, identify failures, and push corrections to improve performance. The core of Domino's pitch and the Navy's wager is speed. Before the company's involvement, updating the AI models that power the Navy's unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, to recognize new or previously unseen mines could take up to 6 months. Domino says it has cut that cycle to days. Robinson illustrated the relevance in the Middle East crisis. If there were UUVs in the Baltic Sea trained on Russian mines, and then they needed to be deployed to the Strait of Hormuz to detect Iranian mines, with Domino's technology, the Navy could be ready in a week rather than a year. A Navy spokesman was not immediately able to provide comment. So the U.S. Navy will spend nearly $100 million to purchase AI programs to help them demine Strait of Hormuz. I sincerely doubt they're going to be using these programs to ever demine or debomb Laos and Cambodia, where we have so many unexploded munitions that thousands of people get injured yearly, and will take, 100 years minimum to clean up, 100 to 250 years to properly clean up, if I remember correctly. But, economics and trade are far more important than human lives to the United States. If we didn't want to have mines in the Strait of Hormuz, why did we bomb Iran? And that is a question that is never going to be properly answered, of course, because it's not about what makes sense. It's about maintaining control. So the United States, and it's just another major wealth transfer, of course, from us to them. The big tech AI corporations suddenly get $100 million of our money, so that way they can spend it on military drones that we also paid for unmanned underwater vehicles, that we paid for, that are going to be used to identify and remove mines in the Strait of Hormuz that are there to deter our ships that we also paid for from going through someone else's territorial waters to transport oil because of a war that we paid for. So all of this is just our money that we're hemorrhaging going into the pockets of billionaires, big tech bros, military contracting corporations, the military industrial complex at large, munitions, war machines, drone companies. All of this in order to solve a problem that didn't exist until we decided to make it a problem. It's insulting, and one should be offended about how much money. $99.7 million. So that way we can better train drones, underwater drones, to identify mines that wouldn't have been there in the first place if we didn't decide to blow up an elementary school in Iran and start a war that we're not winning, that in which winning would look hardly different from the pre-war state to begin with, And all for what? To protect American corporate interests in the Middle East. To continue the U.S. occupation and exploitation of the Middle East. To continue extracting their wealth and their natural resources from their countries to funnel it into the pockets of people in Washington, D.C. and on Wall Street. Really, you, me, and them all have common ground. We're all being robbed blind by corporate elites, and none of us are benefiting from it, but they want us to be mad at each other because they think each other is the enemy. Why? What did any Iranian person ever do to me? What did you ever do to an Iranian? Nothing. Nothing. If we were able to speak the same language, and probably could, many of them speak English. If we all spoke the same language, we'd all get along probably just as well as with anybody else. But once you start throwing in the capitalists' interests, well then, now we have to be convinced that we're enemies. And when we're convinced that we're enemies, we are going to pay out the nose to kill them. We don't get anything out of it, except poorer. They don't get anything out of it, except debtor. Well, the only one who benefits are the corporate elites, the corporations, the billionaires, the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, who exploit us and wage war to exploit them too. If we wanted the oil that bad, I feel like you and I probably could have just paid for it, rather than paying for bombs to go blow it up and then not get it anyway. Paying more at the gas pump. And for what? So, I don't know. Maybe eventually downstream after the socialist revolution in the United States, we'll be able to take these AI technologies and actually apply them to pro-social endeavors like identifying mines in Laos and Cambodia. Now, granted, it is a lot easier to find mines underwater than it is underground because you can see, I imagine, anyway. Maybe there's some technology for that, like sonic scannings of grounds or whatever. I don't know. Maybe you can't do that if they have sensitive bombs there, but you can with intentionally placed mines. So maybe I'm just being a little dramatic there. But still, the United States only ever uses its money to hurt people, and sometimes American dollars are used to our benefit in rare accidental cases. Honestly, the biggest of which is maybe not accidental. It's how all of our money, or all of the money that gets spent on research and development for medical technology, it's all public funding. It's all our money, which is great. But then we have to pay to get the rewards of that from these private corporations who got free money from the government to go make medicine that we then also pay for it to get back. So they're just robbing us blind too. But more importantly is the way that the United States uses its military-industrial complex and its army to wage imperialist war across the globe in order to secure new markets and to exploit the labor, natural resources of foreign places. And it pays for all of that war and exploitation. It buys the chains that it uses to enslave the global south with money it took from your wallet. Hey, comrade, it'd mean a lot if you joined our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. Trump administration's proposed new gun rule will make it harder for trans people to buy firearms. April 27, 2026, via Independent. A new rule enacted by the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives would mean all new gun owners must list their birth sex on mandatory purchase paperwork, even if they have legally or medically changed genders. Such a rule would make it easier for the ATF to gather lists of trans gun owners, simply by identifying where names appear to conflict with the listed sex, according to firearms policy experts. It could also deter trans people from buying guns legally, since complying with paperwork could create a catch-22 situation, and a false statement comes with threats of federal charges and prison time, the expert said. Buying a gun from a licensed dealer requires filling out a firearms transaction record, also known as ATF Form 4473. Lying on the form is a felony, punishable by up to $250,000 in fines and 5 years in jail, or 10 years if the lie is deemed material to the sale's legality. ATF Form 4473 asks the new gun owners to list their sex and ethnicity. If the person has changed their sex on their identity documents, something most states allow, that would theoretically mean they should fill out their new form to match their identity. But that has been complicated by Trump's executive order last January. Within months, ATF officials confirmed that they intended to update Form 4473 to require buyers' sex assigned at birth, which may be different from other legal IDs. That order is unambiguous. It specifically requires all federal forms to ask about birth sex only, and bans them from in any way promoting gender ideology, such as the false claim that males can identify as and thus become women, or vice versa. If a trans person filled out a Form 4473 with their gender identity, and potentially what is listed on their state ID documents, it could lead to a charge of making a false statement in connection with a firearm sale and end up to 10 years in prison. But listing their sex assigned at birth could be treated as false information, since it no longer matches their appearance, body, or official documents. Some trans people may no longer have IDs that match their birth sex anymore. Intersex people, who are often born with ambiguous sex characteristics and assigned a legal sex that may well reject in their later life, could end up in the same position. The irony is that Form 4473 was changed during Trump's first term to add non-binary as an option for the sex question. Since Trump's return to office, the Justice Department has subpoenaed hospitals for information about trans patients. In recent years, Republican-run states have sought to compile lists of trans people via their medical records or driver's license data. Corners of conservative media and right-wing activists have called for trans people to be locked up in mental institutions or treated as a domestic terror threat. According to FBI data, there has been a rise in anti-LGBT+ hate crimes over the last 5 to 10 years, in line with a resurgence of anti-trans politics in the United States. Alright, so first, don't panic buy guns. Just don't do it. It's the last thing we need is a whole bunch of well-intentioned allies of ours buying guns that they don't know how to use and inevitably getting hurt or getting other people hurt. Take a safety class, watch YouTube videos at the very least, do a little bit of reading, and then if you believe that owning a firearm is something that is safe for you to do, make a safe storage plan, and then go purchase a firearm. Now you can do that in a couple of days. You could probably do it by the end of the week. If you feel, oh, I probably do want to buy a gun real quick before I'm not allowed to anymore. In which case I say go for it. Just make sure you do that first. Make sure you actually think it through. If you're buying something like an AR-15, which is probably the best gun for you to just straight up get, you can buy stripped lower. If you don't know what that looks like, just look it up. It's maybe $75 to $120. And then you can just have that on you, and then you can just buy the rest of the gun parts whenever you want and have them mailed to your house. That part itself, the stripped lower, is the gun. You can get that over the counter at a number of gun stores near you, if you feel comfortable doing so, before they update the forms. And then you have that, and you can sit on it forever. If you don't ever feel comfortable actually building it out into a working gun, that's fine. You still have it. That's something you can do. That is something you can panic buy if you want to get something real quick and then figure it out from there. But we don't need scared people running around with guns. That's how people get hurt. So don't do that. Secondly, don't worry about being put on a list. The article does mention that, there are some fears that they might be able to get a list of trans gun owners. But this is one of the very few things that the NRA did that was actually cool. And federal law is that the government cannot make a gun registry, and especially not a searchable gun registry, if they wanted to, because all of the gun forms are stored presently on actual paper at gun shops. They would have to go to all these stores and then collect all the forms and then comb through them individually. Theoretically, that is possible, huge undertaking, huge nightmare. So don't let the idea of, oh my goodness, I'm trans, I'm non-binary, I'm X, Y, and Z. I don't want to be put on a list. I don't want the government to know I have a gun. They won't. They can't. Make sure you're not lying on your forms, and don't lie on your forms. And the whole world's open up to you. Guns are fun and they are cool, but they are risky, or they can provide risk if you don't treat them appropriately. So, with that out of the way, obviously this is just a huge assault on trans people in particular, coming from the far right, the usual suspects, and honestly, I don't see the liberals stepping up to defend this. The people I would expect are, weirdly enough, the really annoying right-wing libertarians. Some of them actually have principles, not good principles, not smart principles, not anything involving intellectual thought, but some of them do have real principles, like Thomas Massey, and will recognize that, hey, you can't just ban people from getting guns. That goes against the Second Amendment, which it does. I'm not going to get on my gun soapbox here all that much. Second Amendment, of course, was kind of designed for us to be able to fight Native Americans and put down slave rebellions. But one of the fortunate side effects of having the Second Amendment means that you do have a right to bear arms. You do have a right to self-defense. And as Huey Newton and Don Cox teach us, we have a greater right than just the legal right of the Second Amendment. We have the right of human dignity that gives all persons the right to defend themselves. As Brother Malcolm teaches us, we have to make sure that we are not doing anything unlawfully, but we can operate within the full extent of the law. It is lawful for you to defend yourself. It is lawful for you to exercise your Second Amendment right. And so it is important that if you feel the need to do so, that you do so before it gets taken away. There is a lot of discussion. I recognize it. Honestly, we could probably have a multiple hour-long video on just this discussion on whether or not guns should be in the hands of the public. A lot of places don't. Poland, for example, despite being as right-wing as they have been, don't let guns in the hands of the general public, by and large. Czech Republic, on the other hand, does. They and Switzerland both have pretty decent gun ownership, and they don't see the mass shootings and mass violence that we see here in the United States. We are infamous for mass shootings, and so the very understandable reaction is, well, we have to get rid of the guns. And that is a complicated discussion that is very much worth having. In the immediate, for us, and within the context of, in particular, trans rights, we know that the far right has guns. They believe they have the monopoly on violence, which means that they have the courage to enact violence against members of the community. And we know that violence can only be stopped, unfortunately, with violence. Remember, nonviolence only works if your oppressor has a conscience. The far right does not. America does not have a conscience. And so, when arms are being used against the people in order to oppress them, then it must be arms that are used to liberate them. It's another thing we learned from Huey Newton. When the people move towards liberation, they must have the basic tool of liberation, which is, unfortunately, the gun. As Mao teaches us also, though, we are advocates for the abolition of war, and we do not want war. But war can only be abolished through war. And in order to put down the gun, one must first take up the gun. So we do not mean, of course, well, that, if you're trans, you should be scared. You have to go out and get a gun and then shoot every single MAGA person you see. Obviously not. Obviously not. Not everybody should have a gun. Too many people have guns. Too many of the wrong people have guns, and honestly, maybe not enough of the right people have them. Too many people on the right have them. But the point is that we should be striving for vigorous self-defense. The people who are coming for our neighbors, our friends in our community, particularly in this instance, transgender members of our community, because, again, transgender people number so few that they are so much easier to actively oppress when so many people don't know any and are propagandized against them and can easily be misled if you don't know any better, I guess. I don't know. I don't want to make it sound like it's easy to dislike trans people. It has been made easy by decades of effort. And we have to resist that, and we have to overcome that. And we also have to keep ourselves and our comrades and neighbors and friends, even people that we don't like who are trans, safe. We owe it to them. And so we owe it to them because we're all part of the community. We all owe each other this. And so we have to realize that when violence is being brought to bear against us, it has to be fought off. We know Trump said stuff earlier about, people who are, I think it was earlier this week, maybe, something like, people who are too pro-trans, if you want to hurt Americans, we're going to find you and we're going to kill you, or whatever bravado or language and words he was using. The violence is there. It is on the streets, and right now it is directed against us. And they are trying to strip away your right to defend yourself through legal means. And they're trying to trick you by saying, we have to do it either because trans people are all domestic terrorists and prone to violence, or nihilistic violent extremists, or they're trying to say, we have to get the guns out of the hands of the public because mass shootings and school shootings. And all of that, and again, I know I'm sounding like one of those guys here. Forgive me. All of that is being brought to bear to remove your ability to defend yourself. And we know that self-defense is important, and we know that people are being hurt. And we know that the government kind of doesn't care whether or not you're doing so legally or lawfully or not, like we saw with Alex Preddy. So we need to take self-defense seriously. We need to take community defense seriously. We need to actually put in the effort, and that effort means education and training. It does not mean go get a gun and carry it wherever you are, and when you get scared, pull it out. Don't be stupid. The last thing we need is more news articles about people, about liberals, or about trans people getting into gunfights and doing stupid shit with guns. Please don't. If you feel the need to get a gun, do so quicker before they put out the new forms. Probably everyone's going to be using the old forms until they run out, so you'll have a little bit of time. I would say probably by the end of summer, maybe. That's me being optimistic. But if that's a measure you feel you need to take, by all means, go ahead and do it. I encourage that. Don't be stupid. Watch gun safety videos. Watch safe handling. Talk to the person who you're actually picking up the gun from. Learn everything you can about it. Don't be an idiot. It's the first rule of gun safety, basically, is don't be a jackass. And do some learning, do some education, and do some training, so that way you're not just some idiot firing randomly with a gun. God forbid you ever need to. Put money into education, put money into training, and hopefully it'll be the most expensive paperweight you ever own. Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. "70 Palestinians in a garbage truck. The outcome of Israel's factory of desperation." April 16, 2026, via Haaretz. On Monday night, Israeli police opened the back of a garbage truck at a West Bank checkpoint and found around 70 Palestinian men packed inside its waste compartment. Bodies pressed against metal, men unfolding one by one, hands raised as a voice cuts through in Arabic. Escot, be silent. The official framing by Israeli authorities followed quickly. The men were described as illegal entrants, attempting to infiltrate central Israel. They were taken for questioning. The driver, a Palestinian citizen of Israel, was arrested for driving without a proper license. What would it take for you to climb into that truck, to step into a space meant for waste, to stand there without air or certainty, knowing that if you're caught, you could be arrested, beaten, or worse? For these men, the motivation may have been a week without income, no permit to work in Israel, rent due, children waiting, no alternative. A few months ago in Bethlehem, an older man stood outside the Church of the Nativity, souvenirs clutched in his hands, olive wood carvings, rosaries, postcards, which he couldn't even afford to lay out on a stand. He told me he hadn't made 20 shekels in over a week, less than $10. His work permit to enter Israel had been revoked. He said it plainly. Work has disappeared. Since October 7, 2023, Israel has revoked tens of thousands of Palestinian work permits. Before the war, these permits sustained a fragile but essential economic reality. Palestinians working in construction, agriculture, and service industries inside Israel, earning wages that are often unattainable in the West Bank. That system was always unequal, always conditional, always subject to sudden closure, but it functioned in a limited way as an economic lifeline. Their removal has left families scrambling, rent unpaid, debts mounting, savings gone. Some turn to black market permits, others, like the men in that truck, try to cross without authorization. This is often framed as an individual desperation, but this desperation is pervasive, and it has a cause. Roughly 60% of the West Bank, Area C, remains under full Israeli control. Building, farming, developing land all require permits that are rarely granted. Water access is restricted. Movement is fragmented by checkpoints that can turn a short commute into an all-day risk. Palestinian goods can only reach outside markets through Israeli-controlled channels, reinforcing a system of economic dependency. Under the Paris Protocol, Israel collects tax revenues on behalf of the Palestinian Authority and can withhold them. And as Israel is currently withholding them, the salaries of teachers, healthcare workers, and civil servants go unpaid. The result is an economy that contracts inward, where even basic stability becomes uncertain. In that context, illegal entrant begins to feel insufficient. If those tax revenues were consistently transferred, salaries would be paid. If movement were not so heavily restricted, work within the West Bank could be more viable. If access to land and water were not so tightly controlled, industries could develop. If schools were not disrupted, whether by closures, raids, or settler violence, then education could offer a path that extends beyond day labor. And if military raids, arrests, and killings were not a constant presence, the calculation of risk might look entirely different. These factors complicate the idea that what happened in that truck was simply law-breaking. Instead, it points to a system in which the occupier becomes a primary, and often only, source of livelihood. What Israeli authorities frame as a security issue is also shaped by systemic restrictions that leave Palestinians with few viable options. From the outside, it can look like a contradiction: the worker who builds in a settlement, the laborer who cleans a city that denies him entry. But for many, the alternatives are out of reach. So they climb into trucks, not because they misunderstand the risk, but because they understand it all too well, and know that staying still may be the greater danger. It's hard for me to imagine a situation in which I would be desperate enough to cram myself into the back of a garbage truck, let alone with 70 other people, and just the heat and the smell and the dirt. And then, of course, like the article describes, the risk of getting caught, it can be, and the punishment and the price for that can be so immensely high. And it's just because the way that Israel has totally occupied and locked down life for Palestinians is beyond anything which we can really imagine. I mean, we know that immigrants into the United States often experience some things like this on their way into the U.S. just to try to get a higher standard of living. And these guys are doing it within their own country. And that, not to defend America's borders or the way that American borders work, but it is more the idea of having to go from Kansas into Missouri in the back of a garbage truck because you can't cross the border without being humiliated and abused, or sent home to a place where you have no or limited access to food, water, power, and no access to work or to income. And then you have people, even at home preying on you, landlords and such. It's a different conversation, but perhaps we see a lot of problems with Palestinians having difficulty to affording rent. I think maybe some Chinese guy should write a book on that, on what they should do about their landlords. I digress. Another thing that's really interesting to me, though, about this article, though, is, I just said that twice, is that this comes from an Israeli newspaper. Yeah, Haaretz is like their progressive newspaper, but the New York Times is often considered a so-called progressive newspaper, and they are the most hateful, racist, genocidal fucks at least on this side of the Missouri, or the Mississippi, and at least close to, especially when it comes to big-time publications. New York War Crimes is horrible. And they correctly identify Israel as an occupation, and they correctly call out Israeli occupation as being catastrophic for Palestinians. Now, I'm not going to give them too much credit. I don't think they actually question the existence of Israel. It's often one of these, oh, well, Israel should be better. Kind of like what we see. Oh, well, the United States should treat Native Americans better, rather than the United States shouldn't exist at all. And I don't think they question whether or not Israel should exist. I think they question whether or not Israel should control the West Bank. But, baby steps maybe. But they're right. Israel controls West Bank taxes. They take taxes for them and then don't actually distribute them where they're supposed to go. That's called theft in any other context. Theft of state resources. And the checkpoints, of course, we know are arbitrary and bizarre. They just exist to humiliate, torture, and disenfranchise Palestinians, to make life difficult for them for no reason. Not to mention the settlements themselves, which are barbarous, and all settlers should just be shot on sight. The water access. If you didn't know, Israel has legal claim, through Israeli law, of course, to all rainwater. So when the rain falls from the sky on the West Bank, it's owned by Israel. They control water access and restrict Palestinian access to water. Why? Obviously to subjugate them, to exploit them, and so that way they can have more water for themselves to do random bullshit with. And building, you can't build without permission. Palestinians cannot build houses in their own country, in territory Israel has said the Palestinians have. Obviously, they don't control it. Israel does. But territory that Israel says Palestinians are allowed to have, and they can't even build there because Israel doesn't say so. The situation in the West Bank is horrific. The situation in Palestine overall is horrific. And, we've all gotten far too familiar with the images of horrible brutality inflicted upon Palestinians in Gaza. I don't know how many of us have considered the brutality and violence inflicted upon Palestinians in the West Bank. And what's important is that Hamas is not in the West Bank. So, the typical American and Israeli excuse of, oh, Hamas, doesn't even apply there. It's just cruelty for cruelty's sake, aiding in the oppression and eventual ethnic cleansing and continued ethnic cleansing that they started in 1948 of the Palestinian people. It is no wonder that Palestinians are ready to subject themselves to such an uncomfortable, we'll be generous, an uncomfortable experience, such as cramming themselves in the back of a garbage truck, just to try to get opportunity to live or to breathe a little easier with less weight crushing their chest and the boot lifted off their neck just a bit. It is no wonder that the Palestinians resist. Legally, they have the right to resist, but we recognize that they are also right to resist. Hamas did nothing wrong. PFLP do nothing wrong. Palestinian Islamic Jihad has done nothing wrong. Lion's Den has done nothing wrong. The rest of the Palestinian factions, which fight and to use arms to resist violently Israeli apartheid, Israeli oppression, and the American genocide going on there, are right to resist. They have to throw that boot off their neck. They have to pull the sword from their throat. And they will do so, and they must do so, by any means necessary. Solidarity TV has helped produce a leftist quarterly magazine titled The Comrade Quarterly. Get your copy, submit your work, or learn more at comradequarterly.org. Microsoft, Amazon hand Pentagon more control over AI systems use. May 1st, 2026 via Bloomberg. NVIDIA Corp., Microsoft Corp., Reflection AI Inc., and Amazon.com Inc. have all newly struck agreements with the U.S. Defense Department for lawful operational use, according to the statement. The officials asked not to be named to discuss internal discussions. On Friday, the Pentagon posted on their social media site Twitter that Oracle had also joined the roster of technology companies that had agreed to deploy their AI tools on classified networks. The deals provide the Pentagon with wide leeway to potentially use powerful advanced AI technologies for secret combat operations, such as assisting with targeting. Many of the technology companies already provide AI tools to the U.S. military, but defense officials have been seeking to expand the terms of use since the fall of 2025. Other technology companies that have already recently agreed to similar deals include SpaceX, OpenAI, and Google. These agreements accelerate the transformation towards establishing the United States military as an AI-first fighting force, said the statement, which refers to the technology companies involved and which also marks the first official Pentagon confirmation of a new accord with Google reported earlier this week. The effort to deliver new deals with technology companies for maximalist military use of advanced AI comes as the Pentagon is racing to develop viable alternatives to Anthropic's Claude tool. An acrimonious fracture between Anthropic and senior defense officials exposed a recurring fault line between the Pentagon and Silicon Valley over the looming risks of AI at war. The Pentagon refused to heed Anthropic's stated red line seeking to limit how the U.S. military can use AI in classified operations during recent renegotiations, and sought to eject the company from all defense supply lines. The company didn't want its technology used for mass domestic surveillance of U.S. citizens or for fully autonomous weapon systems. Since the fallout with Anthropic, the Pentagon has accelerated its efforts to bring on other AI companies to agree to expanded usage terms for their models and infrastructure on secret and top-secret networks. In addition, defense officials are seeking to ensure the U.S. military avoids depending on any one single company or set of limitations, according to one of the Pentagon officials briefed on the talks. NVIDIA's new agreement, for instance, gives far greater license to the Pentagon than the terms of use in previous AI deals. The company has agreed not to impose any usage policies or model licenses that would restrict the Department of Defense's use of its models beyond what is required by U.S. law and constitutional authority, according to a person familiar with the agreement, who asked not to be named to discuss sensitive matters. NVIDIA agreed to provide full and effective use of their capabilities in support of department missions, including for autonomous weapon systems development, according to the person. The department's use of any NVIDIA models, weights, or other capabilities will be consistent within the civil liberties and constitutional rights of Americans under law, the person said, a commitment that stops short of any clearly stipulated monitoring and evaluation mechanisms. The agency gave itself 6 months to replace Claude, which is being used for U.S. military operations against Iran. The disagreement is now mired in a court battle. The Pentagon's efforts to equip the U.S. military with cutting-edge AI at the classified level will help human-machine teams that can handle immense volumes of data, said Cameron Stanley, the defense agency's chief digital and AI officer, in a statement referring to the new deals. Several campaign groups have highlighted the risks of relying on unpredictable AI-assisted systems in support of life and death decisions. AI systems can be prone to error and can lead to automation bias, or a tendency to trust machine outputs over human reasoning, the critics have argued. I really hope the AI bubble pops and all of these companies go straight down the drain. They suck. Even Anthropic, which we'll give smallest amount of credit to for drawing any kind of lines with the U.S. military and U.S. imperialist aims, needs to go. Oracle, we know, is straight up evil. They are gleeful about waging war against the Palestinian people, against the Lebanese people, against Syria, against Iraq, and against the Yemeni people. And we know that Amazon Web Services, I'm not sure if they are mentioned specifically in this article, as they're definitely one of them, has been deeply involved in U.S. military operations. SpaceX, which is garbage. Really privatizing NASA, that's some bullshit. It's not just offensive on like a, Elon Musk sucks kind of way, but I'll lean a slight bit into patriotism here. NASA took us to the fucking moon. Really? We're gonna replace them with some guy's ego project? Get the fuck out of here. I digress. That's all I'm going to say about that. It should be offensive on an American level. It's offensive. OpenAI, Google. Google. Remember when their slogan used to be "Don't be evil"? Huh. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Reflection AI. I think that's one that I'm not particularly familiar with. Just providing AI tools to the U.S. military. And, of course, among those tools is targeting. Part of the reason why we've been so gung-ho about the war the war against Palestine and the war against Iran is we have Ukraine to develop drone warfare for us, and we have Israel to develop AI targeting for us. That's all it is. We're using Russian soldiers and all Arab civilians as live test subjects for the military-industrial complex to come up with new and creative ways of automating murder, and importantly, without the human element who might question the decisions. If only there were a big blockbuster movie that Disney put out that was about using AI to target people for being threats and how un-American and how evil that was. It's called Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Maybe the last movie that they put out that I liked. That's not important. But it is something, the relevant part is that at not too long ago, we all kind of recognized that this was a really terrible thing, to the point where this was the evil villain plan in a major American blockbuster. And now this is just page 3 news. The fact that they're purging Anthropic from here is also cause for concern, because what they specifically wanted was they're purging Anthropic because Anthropic didn't want its AI tech to be used for, quote, mass domestic surveillance of U.S. citizens or fully autonomous weapon systems. When the Pentagon flushes you out of your contracts because you say, yeah, I don't want you using my technology to do mass surveillance on Americans, I feel like that's some cause for concern. If you're an American citizen, or if you're planning on being in America at any point, that would be cause for concern. And especially when we're hosting the World Cup and then in 2 years, the Olympics. People from all over the world are going to be here. And that should be a huge red flag. And then on top of that, for fully autonomous weapon systems. And they say, nope, we want those fully autonomous weapon systems. No, we want to have mass domestic surveillance of U.S. citizens. the Pentagon. And they want to create AI targeting software or continue to develop AI targeting software so that way they can find, identify, and destroy people that they feel are a threat to them domestically. It's, how far away are we from the United States authorizing drone strikes on American soil? Probably not too far, if they haven't already and we just didn't know about it. And this is a huge problem. It's concerning, it's disgusting, and I can believe that more people don't care about this. A lot of people don't care about anything. But this is a big reason why we need people on the front lines to worry about these data centers, because this is the kind of information that those data centers are used to do. Now, maybe your neighbor doesn't give a shit about the Pentagon using AI to create new weapon systems, either for whatever reasons they may have. They might care about the AI data centers in their neighborhood, clear-cutting their forests, destroying local wildlife habitats, and emitting noise, heat, and light at all hours of the day. And that's somewhere where we can make a change, because it doesn't matter what these contracts are if they can't build or they can't use their data processing centers. So this is why, like we covered last time, these giant data center projects are covering, millions of square feet, the equivalent of 51 Walmarts, 51 Walmart supercenters in a town of 7,000 people. This is why it's important to make sure that that can't happen. So that way these corporations that the Pentagon is paying to develop autonomous weapons and mass surveillance that are going to be used against us can't do so. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. NSA warning, reboot your internet router now. April 11th, 2026 via Forbes. NSA warns U.S. internet users to reboot their routers, with attackers continuing to target home networks to steal personal and sensitive data. Don't be a victim, the spy agency says in a 2023 advisory as directed to citizens again this month. Malicious cyber actors may leverage your home network to gain access to personal, private, and confidential information. Now, the National Security Agency has added its voice to an FBI warning that Russia's GRU intelligence agency is exploiting vulnerable routers worldwide to intercept and steal sensitive military, government, and critical infrastructure information. Citizens are warned that APT-28, aka Fancy Bear, hackers working for Russia's military have been collecting credentials and exploiting vulnerable routers worldwide, including compromising TP-Link routers using CVE 2023-5022-4. The TLDR on this warning is to stop using end-of-life internet routers and to ensure that ones still under support are updated regularly. So let's face it, vast numbers of home internet users never bother, nor do they usually change router passwords or, for the more advanced, add gets networks at home. NSA reminds citizens that its best practices for securing your home network means changing default usernames and passwords, disabling remote management interfaces from the internet, updating to latest firmware versions, and upgrading end-of-support devices. In other words, don't ignore that router operating quietly in the corner of your living room or home office. It's a major security risk. NSA also warns users that, at a minimum, you should schedule weekly reboots of your routing devices, smartphones, and computers. Regular reboots help remove implants and ensure security. That just means turning it off and on again. When was the last time you actually rebooted your home router? No doubt you restart it when the internet fails as part of an improvised get well, but I'm fairly certain you don't schedule automatically or manually any form of weekly restart. While you probably haven't been targeted by Russia's military, you will be targeted by the cyber attacks and the hacks that have always been a threat to home internet, smartphone, and computer users, and which are now surging thanks to AI. That necessitates good housekeeping habits, changing passwords, updating whenever and as soon as updates are released, and, yes, weekly reboots. The advice is forming a habit of restarting devices, including routers, every Sunday. Meanwhile, PC Mag has published the list of brands affected by the wider router clampdown. FCC router ban is bad for news for these brands, the website reports. The list relies on data derived from internet speed tests. The FCC's ban on foreign-made Wi-Fi routers has many of us questioning whether we'll be able to stick with the router brands we like best. A new report using speedtest.net data identifies which brands will be affected most based on their popularity in the US. Wi-Fi Now warns that, to our knowledge, consumer-grade Wi-Fi routers available in the United States are manufactured nearly exclusively in China, Taiwan, and Vietnam. These include popular home networking products by major Wi-Fi router brands such as Netgear, TP-Link, Google Nest, Eero, Ubiquiti, and many others. The list, compiled by Ookla, highlights the problem. Compiled from speed test users, the list can be considered a proxy for Wi-Fi router market share. As far as we know, Wi-Fi Now says there is no domestic U.S. manufacturing of any consumer-grade Wi-Fi router at this time. Whatever your brand of router, given the FBI router warning backed up by cyber agencies around the world, check now to ensure that it is receiving firmware support by checking the model number, and then reboot it now. We're a news program, not a conspiracy organization. So I'm going to say that a lot of this sounds like pretty decent consumer safety advice. I have my questions about why the NSA and the FBI are telling everyone, oh, go update your internet real quick right now, and why I'm supposed to be scared of the big spooky Russians. But, you know, it is probably more realistic that someone like you or I would get hacked or infiltrated by some random bozo out there who's trying to steal $30 from our bank accounts, and rather than, you know, try to take down the United States. What is Russia? What is the GRU? The GRU? I don't know. GRU. I've always called it the GRU. What are they going to do with my internet? But I've had the same question about people worried about, your toaster is made in China. It's going to have microchips. It's going to scan your house and listen to all your conversations. And what? The Chinese are going to learn that I like my bagels toasty and that I complain a lot. What is President Xi going to learn from your average American that he can't learn from just scrolling through Instagram comments or some shit? What is Russia going to do to your average person? What is Iran or the north of Korea really going to do? What information are they going to steal from us that A, American corporations aren't stealing from us already, and B, they're going to be able to do anything with? I think that maybe they need to put out the Russians are going to steal your stuff in order to convince older people who might be actually spooked by that to actually do this, put in updates and maintain sense of internet safety security. I don't know. Maybe that's it. Maybe in 60 years when I'm an 80-year-old man doddering around to the computer, they're going to say, hey, remember the capitalists are out to get you, so make sure you update your brain scanner every night before you go to bed. I don't know, whatever we're going to have in 80 years, in 60 years or whatever. I don't know, maybe that's what they have to do. And then you get old man me going, the landlords aren't going to get my brain. I don't know. Maybe it's that kind of thing. Maybe it's something as simple as that. I do find it, I don't know. Someone who maybe knows more about this kind of technology should tell us whether or not there's a suspicious reason that the NSA is telling us all to update and reboot our routers, other than just it's good safe practice. You should be rebooting your stuff regularly, though. I grew up learning that was good hygiene, is that the word I want to use? Good maintenance policy. You know, for laptops, you unplug it when you close it and then plug it back in when you open it up. Keep it shut down over the weekend or whatever. Reboot your devices regularly. That's what I would always do. Reboot your phone once a week. They say on Sundays. If that works for you, great. Get into good habits of doing stuff like that. I'm pretty sure it's good for your devices. And it says it helps to remove implants and ensure security. I think, yeah, that probably does. I find it funny that they follow this up with, though, that means turning it off and turning it back on again. So maybe it is just trying to get the spooky Russians angle, is to convince, your grandfather to actually take a look at what's going on with his router. Maybe saying, "Hey, Dad, hey, Granddad, it's good for your internet." But then, oh, the Russians. Because if they have to tell you what a reboot is, maybe that's the type of person it's in for. But then they also tell us like all of the TP-Link routers, specific numbers, and the APT28, which I don't think doesn't mean anything to most people anyway. Yeah, change your passwords regularly. Typical stuff. You should not be using the same password for all your devices constantly. And it is interesting to learn from this that there are no consumer Wi-Fi routers being made in the United States. I didn't know that. Not something I would have thought to look up on my own. It's interesting. I'm sure someone's going to be really butthurt about that, but that's about it. I don't really, maintain some good device maintenance protocols. Keep yourself safe. Don't click on any weird links. Typical HR phishing scam stuff. IRS is never going to call you for your information. So if they ask, or Social Security is never going to call you for your, IRS might call you. Social Security is never going to call you to ask for your Social Security number, that kind of thing. Just be aware and be mindful, and don't trust the government all that much. But the government also says don't go above 75 on the interstate because you can crash and die, and that's pretty good advice too. So, not everything that they're going to say is going to be something suspicious, but yeah, don't open yourself up to security risks. But the Russians aren't going to hack you. The Chinese aren't going to hack you unless you work for the federal government. Because honestly, the only people that they'd really be going after would be federal infrastructure, not personal stuff. And the reason is because the capitalists, the imperialists, are constantly expanding and constantly pushing new frontiers against enemies of their empire. And that includes capitalist states like Russia and socialist states like China. So they're always going to be warring against other capitalists. Just look at World War I, intercapitalist warfare. And so that means we're going to butt heads, and that means that we're going to be doing hacky stuff to each other. Them hacking into us hacking into them. So if you work for the federal government, quit your job. No, if you work for the federal government and might get hacked by Russia, yeah, maybe if you work at the Pentagon, that's actually something to worry about. If, like the rest of us, you have a normal job and you use your internet to stream movies and spend way too much time on Wikipedia instead of going to bed at a healthy hour, it's not the Russians. It's going to be some guy trying to get, your savings account. So just be mindful, be aware, and maintain your stuff. Solidarity TV has helped produce a leftist quarterly magazine titled The Comrade Quarterly. Get your copy, submit your work, or learn more at comradequarterly.org. Google starts scanning all your photos as a new update goes live. April 20th, 2026 via Forbes. Google Photos confirms its latest update can scan all your photos to use actual images of you and your loved ones in AI image generation. That means Gemini seeing who you know and what you do. You'll likely have tens or hundreds of thousands of photos. They're all exposed if you update. Personal Intelligence, Google's latest AI upgrade path, gives Gemini an inherent understanding of your preferences from the start. By integrating this context directly with Nano Banana 2, Gemini can automatically fill in the blanks, Google says. A lot of your most significant moments live in your Google Photos library. By connecting your Google Photos library to Personal Intelligence, Gemini goes a step further than just understanding your interests. It can use actual images of you and your loved ones. By its very nature, this goes right to the heart of your most private and intimate moments. Now your inner circle can become the stars of your images, whether you want a result that feels pulled straight from your life, or one that takes your imagination a bit further. It's undoubtedly innovative and exciting, but you must decide carefully before connecting your personal data to Google's AI platform. This is coming first to the US before it rolls out everywhere else. Google assures that bringing personal details into your images shouldn't mean compromising on privacy, which is why our core commitments haven't changed. The Gemini app does not directly train its models on your private Google Photos library. But Google does say that we train on limited info, like specific prompts in Gemini and the model's responses, to improve functionality over time. That's why connecting your Google apps to Gemini remains an opt-in experience that you can adjust your settings to at any time. It's opt-in for a reason. Keep that in mind. TechRadar says the feature sets up a much more powerful way to teach Gemini about yourself. Traditional AI image generation just depends heavily on how well you describe what you want. Here, description becomes secondary. The system is already working from a base layer of information. But that's not really the point. Gizmodo sums it up pretty well as solving a problem no one had, with Google making image generation a little creepier. If you want to know which of your personal and private photos have piqued Gemini's interest, click on the Sources button. It'll show you which image was auto-selected to guide the creation. You can even ask Gemini directly for information on the attribution and sources used for that specific image. There's a lot going on in AI these days. Gmail's VP of Product, Blake Barnes, acknowledged in a recent update for users. Sometimes it might even feel overwhelming. Indeed, don't jump into this until you're very sure. I do love how this article switches back and forth between, hey, this is pretty weird, and oh my goodness, I want to get that Google ad money. It's like, wow, Google AI is so exciting and fresh and new, but be warned. Such a funny way to write an article. I don't like this at all. I can't imagine most people do. Like the article suggests, this is not a problem people were having. I don't want Google, I don't want any of these corporations, I don't want anybody going through my phone and creating a profile of me anyway. But I certainly don't want some corporation to be doing that. Least of all Google, who has military contracts with the Pentagon in order to develop AI programs to do targeting and mass surveillance of American citizens and autonomous weapon systems. Like, this is a huge problem for me, which is why I'm not going to let Google scan all my stuff. It says you can just tell it no. I don't always trust that. You know, like, oh, you just hit the mute button on your Google Home device, and then it can't listen to you. And then you say, hey, Google, and it goes, oh, sorry, I can't hear you right now because I'm muted. I don't know. It bugs me. It lurks. It lurks in the back of my brain that it's doing things that it's telling me it's not. Maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm just, I'm too nervous because I don't fully understand the technology. Very possible. I also don't like that this article is half just straight up written by Google. So like a Google press release for half this article. It reminds me of whenever something happens and you'll see the New York War Crimes publish an article and it's all just whatever the police said about the thing. I don't trust the police to tell me about what's going on. We know that they're liars. Google is going to tell me whatever they want to make me comfortable with whatever they're selling me. And I hate their stupid little millennial cutesy names. Nano Banana 2. Call it Google AI Program number 2 or whatever. Call it, I don't know. Call it something normal. It's not endearing and it's not cute. It's like, well, these things were on an ice cream sandwich or whatever. Like, come on. Take it seriously, I guess. That's a personal gripe. I'm sure that's not a real concern, and probably other people disagree with that. I don't know, maybe they like seeing stuff that's more easy to remember or something. I don't know. I don't want, this says here, the feature sets up a much more powerful way to teach Gemini about yourself. I don't want Gemini to learn about me. I don't want Google's AI program to look at all my photos, see who I associate with, and learn information about me based on my pictures. I don't know the point of this on the consumer end. I guess maybe if you're really into wasting water and electricity and destroying your neighbors land in order to build giant data centers to make slappy pictures of yourself with 6 fingers and no shadow. Maybe this really hits for you. Maybe like, wow, I can really make AI photos of myself and my friends easier. I don't know, that's lame. Don't do AI photos. Just take an actual photo. Or, I don't know, do a shitty Photoshop like everybody else used to do. It's got more soul in it anyway. And my personal worry about this is that this is going to be used to train AI pornography on people, or that, because we've been seeing this as a real problem, people using AI programs to create pornography of people that they know. And of course, we know this is going to be very widely used to harass, humiliate, and degrade women in particular. So, and oftentimes girls as well. There's a big problem in some schools. So, you know, for that reason alone, maybe you don't want Google to be scanning all your photos. You don't want people, or maybe you don't want Google scanning anybody's photos. That way someone can't do weird things with your photos. But I don't want Google personal intelligence to read my emails. It's an invasion of privacy. And it's just not, it's not something that's helpful. It's not something that's useful. And all this coming from a corporation that is now being heavily invested into military technology, mass surveillance, and autonomous weapons. I really don't want them to be able to gather this information from me, from my photos, see who I'm friends with, who I associate with, the kind of people that I save photos of, I guess, and just generate a profile of who I am based on the photos that I take and save. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.